Hi, I am Bas Rijkse from basrijkse.com. The question we're going to answer in this video is, what is the Sabbath? And is it something that you need to respect as a new covenant believer? So we're free from the law, but what about the Sabbath observance? Is there such a thing as a Sunday being the Christian Sabbath? We must talk about this issue as it will rob us of our freedom just as any other part of the law does. Yes, weekly Sabbath observation is rooted in the law. If we impose Sunday as the Christian Sabbath on believers today, we must likewise observe the rest of the law. The law is an all or nothing system. Adopting portions of it is not an option. Contrary to popular belief, Sunday is not the Christian Sabbath. With my Dutch Reformed background, I was taught that Sunday is the day of the Lord. It was regarded as a special day of the week that we ought to keep holy. I was required to consider Sunday as our Sabbath time, and everybody was expected to rest on that day. Not only did we go twice to church, but we were also told that what we could and couldn't do. We couldn't play with friends as usual. Doing manual labor around the house was forbidden. So no mowing the lawn, no washing of the car, doing laundry, etc. Also, doing a hobby was not allowed. And another aspect was to never buy groceries or anything else on Sunday, for then you would not only be guilty of breaking the law by not keeping the Sabbath rest yourself, you would also be found guilty for letting other people work for you so that they would not be able to observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. So buying something like ice cream would cause double trouble in your life. This would of course also include eating in restaurants on Sundays. And that is something that is common in some places like the USA, and it's strictly forbidden in other places like here in the Netherlands. Can you see how this is a man-made rule and not an invention of God? There are still many ways that some Christians mark Sunday as a Sabbath day. We need to ask ourselves the question, what is the Sabbath? And is there such a thing as a holy day during the week that we must set apart for special observance? In Exodus 20, the Lord commanded the observance of the Sabbath day in the Ten Commandments that were given to Moses on 2 tablets of stone on Mount Sinai. In the Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy commandment, God connected the Sabbath day with the rest he took on the seventh day of creation. And for the Jews, the Sabbath was essentially a reminder of the seventh day of creation in which God rested after his work. Accordingly, God mandated that Israel remember the Sabbath day and reserve it for rest. Today, we look back on the finished work of creation. We exclaim, along with King David, how creative and beautiful the universe is, Psalm 8 verse 19. But a greater feat than creation has accomplished, the redemptive work of Jesus Christ on the cross. Just as God declared his creation good and then rested, Jesus announced from Calvary, "It is finished," and then sat down at the right hand of God. The author of Hebrews invites us to rest along with God. We rest by ceasing from dead works we thought would gain us favor with God. Rather than performing religious acrobats to rid ourselves of sin, we can sit down with Jesus. We can simply agree, yes, it is finished. This is entering God's rest. So let me share how we as people under grace celebrate the Sabbath today. Hebrews 4, 9 through 11 says, "There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For those who enter God's rest also rest from their own work as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest. Hebrews 4, 1 through 11 talks about a Sabbath rest that is available to all New Testament believers, but is not necessarily functional in all New Testament believers. This New Testament Sabbath rest is simply a relationship with God in which we cease from doing things by our own effort and let God do the work through us. The Sabbath for us is not a day, but rather a relationship with God through Jesus. The Old Testament Sabbath was a perfect picture of this New Testament relationship. While all the other nations of the world were working 7 days a week, God's people only worked 6 and dedicated the 7th day to worshipping their God. The natural mind would say they wouldn't fare as well, and yet they were blessed above all nations of the earth. The Jews were also commanded to let their fields lay idle every 7th year and call it the whole year a Sabbath unto the Lord. No crops could be sown, no vineyards could be pruned, and no fruit could be gathered. And the Lord blessed the Jews with 3 times the normal harvest in the 6th year to sustain them through the 6th year and the 7th years and into the 8th years when the crops were growing again. This was an undeniable witness that it was the blessings of their covenant God and not their efforts to produce this prosperity. Thus, God illustrated to all people who lived under the Old Covenant that salvation was the work of God and not of their own efforts. The Sabbath was a covenant between God and the nation of Israel. The New Testament church is not mentioned observing the Sabbath. The Sabbath is only mentioned in the book of Acts in connection with the Jews, and only then twice more in the New Testament, explaining this relationship which we now have access to. There were even admonitions given to the New Testament church not to esteem one day above the other, but warnings not to condemn those who do. In contrast to the Old Testament requirement to keep the Sabbath, in the New Testament there is the greater purpose of the Sabbath revealed. In Colossians 2, 16 and 17, Paul reveals that the Sabbath was only a shadow of things to come and is now fulfilled in Christ. It says, "Therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon, a celebration of the Sabbath day." These are the shadows of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. This verse makes it clear that the Sabbath was symbolic. It was a mere shadow of the substance, that is the reality, that would come. Is it wrong to keep the Sunday or any other day of the week, for that matter, as a day of rest and worship? No, not at all. According to Exodus 23:12, one of the purposes of the Sabbath was to give man and his animals 1 day of physical rest each week. And today's medical science has proven that our bodies need at least 1 day of rest each week to function at its peak. Deuteronomy 5 verse 15 also clearly states that the Sabbath was to serve as a reminder to the Jews that they had been slaves in Egypt and were delivered from bondage, and not by their own efforts, but by the supernatural power of God. So even though God doesn't require Sunday to be the designated Sabbath day for a Christian as a day of rest and worship, scheduling 1 day of rest per week will help you function at your best. Thus, it's actually good to keep 1 day a week separate from all your day-to-day activities. But we cannot regard any day of the week as more or less holy, since everything has become holy, since we ourselves are holy people in Christ. In other words, Sunday is not the Christian Sabbath. Spiritually speaking, the meaning of Sabbath is that the work of Jesus Christ is finished and He is now our resting place. We don't work to gain God's favor or acceptance. Because of the finished work of Christ, all of life is an enjoyment of a Sabbath. Hebrews 4 verse 10 says, "The one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works as God did from his." So for the Christian, the Sabbath is not a day. Not Sunday, not Saturday, not any other day. The Sabbath for the Christian is a person named Jesus Christ. The Bible invites us to enter into a Sabbath as believers. Enter into Sabbath rest. Jesus is our Sabbath. It's not a day of the week, it's a life. Jesus Christ is the rest, the Sabbath, for those of us who believe. So to suggest then that Sunday is the Christian Sabbath is just an attempt to bring the Old Testament law and superimpose that on New Testament Christianity. And the two don't mix. The real Christian Sabbath is Jesus Christ. There is no greater rest. So, what's our conclusion? Genuine Sabbath rest is found in Christ and not in a particular day of the week. In Colossians 2 verse 16 from the Mirror translations sums it up well. "Do not let anyone therefore bring a restriction to your freedom by reviving religious rules and regulations pertaining to eating and drinking, all Jewish festivals, new moons, and Sabbaths. They have come to an end in Christ." Can it be any clearer? Sabbaths have come to an end, for the Sabbath is not a day anymore, but a person, Jesus. So enjoy your 24/7 Sabbath rest. If you know anyone who could benefit from this video, make sure to share it. And if you're new here, make sure to click the link below this video to subscribe and get updates via email. I help motivated Christians to learn how to walk in fullness of identity and power, bring meaningful influence, and fulfill their dream with passion. So click the link below this video so you don't miss any new videos and updates. I thank you for watching and I see you in the next video.